Hey everyone, it's Erin with Counter Read, joined by Brandon, also of Counter Read, and we are here to unfortunately recap another Husker loss. This one was pretty dramatic, if I can say so myself. Nebraska lost 24-17 in overtime. There were a number of times where it felt like that win was just so well within Nebraska's reach, and then it just slipped away, which feels a little bit like at least one of the storylines of this season. So we're just going to jump right into it because it's late. You might be watching this on Sunday as well, but you also may not be interested in recapping everything. So we're just going to give you some quick thoughts. Brandon, first, how are you? And then two, what are your first initial takeaways as we think about this game?
Um, I'm doing well, maybe better than Nebraska football and everyone who follows it at the moment is doing. We've seen a lot of close Nebraska losses over the recent past. That one felt pretty brutal to me for a lot of reasons. Yeah, like the moment it went to overtime, I immediately went back to 2016, kind of the last time Nebraska was playoff ranked at the time of that game, and I honestly kind of wonder at this point, like, when's the next time I'll feel good about, like, okay, it's going to overtime, that's fine, Nebraska can do this, because I did not feel that way with this game.
Yeah, and I do have to say I incorrectly said this, which maybe for better or worse in the game day guide, I said they were on an 8 game losing streak. My apologies. It was a 9 game and now it's 10. So I apologize for missing that one extra loss. It just Wisconsin just has Nebraska's number at this point. And I think maybe it's not even so much Wisconsin has Nebraska's number as much as Nebraska has its own number. There were so many times where Nebraska just couldn't get out of its own way. And it like that is quarterback situation aside. You can look and go first string, second string, third string quarterback and what that means or does not mean. But it just kind of consistently, there are just mistakes. We were talking about this in our game day chat that, Prohaska had a number of times where he allowed the person he was defending to just kind of go right by him. And so that's not to put blame entirely on him, but like what my point is with that is these little things build up over time, and these little things, these little mistakes are just too big for Nebraska. Whereas like another team, especially if they have their first string quarterback in, can maybe get around that, can get away from something breaking down on the offensive line. Nebraska's not in that position. So when it's for Huska or whoever that has a moment where they just don't accomplish the task at hand quite as effectively as they need to, Nebraska's just not good enough to be able to overcome those mistakes. And I think that was my general takeaway again, is that there's a lot of positives still. And I know no one wants to hear me say that, so I'm not going to like harp on that. It just, unfortunately, there's just also way too many small mistakes. And for a team like Nebraska right now, small mistakes feel like mountains to climb. And that's just where I'm at right now, is they have made mountains out of molehills, and they've also just, I don't know, they haven't been able to get out of their own way. There's a lot of other like things that, to break down play calling and all of that piece. But when I'm talking about like just mistakes themselves, and then you do get into the whole play calling piece, which I am curious what your thoughts about the play calling at this point in the season is.
Yeah, it hasn't been a sterling resume for year one. That's, injuries to the offense completely acknowledged. Like, Nebraska's playing with half a deck here for the most part. But though I think you could argue, and Braylon Allen was a big difference maker in his ability to for them to put him in the game, and even dinged up, like, make some plays in the second half in particular, or in the last two-thirds of that game. But until the last pass, which was like a desperation attempt, was intercepted, Nebraska committed no turnovers in this game, and Wisconsin didn't either. It was largely straight up. And if I'm mistaken, forgive me, but to the best of my recollection, I think Nebraska committed one penalty over the past two games. Tonight they had seven. You mentioned Teddy Prohaska got flagged for a couple. I'm not putting it all on his tab by any means, but it's notable, because I think that goes to your point of like, okay, you finally get to this game where in regulation, at least, you commit no turnovers. So you weren't able to take advantage of that. Like, I think this game is kind of Nebraska's season writ large in one aspect, in that the defense continues to answer the bell most of the time. Like, you're never going to be a perfect defense. You're just not going to shut teams out for the entire season. Like, you're going to give up some plays, et cetera, et cetera. Um, that said, Nebraska's defense got two really, really big fourth down stops in the second half. But the offense, like, and I wrote this, I think 2 weeks ago, that it was heading this way. It's totally reliant on big plays. Their two touchdowns were a 58-yarder, and which was a broken play for Chuba Purdy, the first touchdown, and I think a 55-yarder. And that's what you got. Like, it's just be it due to injuries, play calling, whatever soup you want to put together with whatever ingredients, like, they can't drive the ball and go down the field. That said, like, when the chips are down, Chuba Purdy almost got Nebraska there last week before throwing the interception, and with a drive to go this week, got them down to the point where Nebraska essentially played for a field goal, which is an interesting contrast to last week when everybody was like, please just take the field goal, go up. And they're different situations, but it'll be interesting to see. Like, we're doing this before Matt Rule talks, um, to see the response to that, because in one instance it was like, be aggressive, or like, you were too aggressive. In this instance, because Nebraska lost, it all of a sudden feels like not aggressive enough, because Nebraska essentially played for the field goal to tie that game. So it's just a team with very thin margins. um Iowa won the Big Ten West today, on Saturday, depending on when you're watching this. So they come into this Black Friday game against Nebraska on a total free roll. And Nebraska all of a sudden has pressure to win to potentially make a bowl game. And that was flipped in this game. Like, this game was very, very even in my mind. And I ended up going with Nebraska for that reason. And when they were up 14-0, like, there were moments where I felt like Wisconsin was like, doesn't want to be here. Not having the season it wants, like, doesn't want to be here. And they turned that around. And Nebraska couldn't turn it back around, I guess, is kind of the bottom line for me.
Yeah, and I do think it's really important. I want to be very intentional with this, that like I am not in any way directing any blame toward one person. And I know
Yeah.
you said that, but like just because I brought up Prohuska, he was just an example of someone where unfortunately, like good teams, when one player has a misstep or even a couple of missteps, they're able to make those up elsewhere. Unfortunately, Nebraska is still just too fragile of a team. I think that is maybe how I would want to say that, is Nebraska is just too fragile of a team. Yeah, and then there's play calling that some of it I don't even think we might fully understand the thinking and the thought process of some of this play calling and the choices until we get out of the season entirely. I feel like those are things that Rule will want to dissect and dive into further, and so we'll see. Maybe they're calling plays based on the personnel, which obviously you do, but at the same time, there's sometimes questions where I'm like, what was the choice with that? Like, I keep going back to Chuba again, against Maryland, where like maybe that final play wasn't the call to make for your third string quarterback who doesn't have the experience. So there's a ton of questions to ask of the coaches. Matt Rule, he'll speak to the media post game, and he'll do his best. He'll say, I want to take all the questions. He's usually not as reflective at that point because he hasn't had time to watch film. So I always encourage everyone to tune in on either this week, it will be Monday and Wednesday, to hear more from him, because he does tend to get a little bit more insightful, if you will, after he's had some time to kind of sit with the result and dissect it. But yeah, the pressure is big. Nebraska senior day, Iowa at home doesn't really I mean, Iowa doesn't want to lose, but at the same time, Iowa's already clinched the Big Ten West. Iowa is already going to a bowl game. Nebraska, on the other hand, is now looking to go to a bowl game. Nebraska had hoped for an opportunity to potentially go to the Big Ten championship, and now that is off the table. So, it becomes a do or die situation for Nebraska. So this week suddenly, went from being a little bit of a breathing room to not. And now, we have some potential injuries that I haven't seen an update on yet. But those could be impactful in the long run. So yeah, unfortunately on Saturday night, it's kind of, it's tough because I think at this point we're trying to grasp for like how to solve this problem right now. And I don't think that this is something that can necessarily be solved overnight. Well, I don't think we ever thought that, but you know what I mean? Like at this point, I think a lot of these are going to be solved in the off season. So at this point, what Nebraska is playing for is post for that extra practice time, the extra bowl game. It's kind of, you got nothing to lose. So this week becomes a you have nothing to lose, play like it. And we'll see how it ends up.
Yeah, I mean, in Wisconsin, I think in a way kind of demonstrated its own like things are serious now nature in that, I mentioned this or I wrote this in the preview this week. Like in a lot of ways, I think the worst thing that could happen was if Wisconsin came out really willing to run the football, which they didn't, which they hadn't all season. Ran the ball 40 times tonight, which is their second highest total of the season. Looking at it now, like, and it was because it worked. I mean, and that was the curious thing to me when I was looking at Wisconsin. I was like, they run the ball pretty well. They're just not. And then they did against Nebraska when kind of the chips were down and they extended the uh bowl streak. So I think this will be their 23rd straight bowl, which is the third or fourth longest in college football. Totally makes sense. Nebraska, I don't know if it has the freedom to like just be like that bare bones. Which I don't know. Maybe it does. It's just this game, it flipped in the second quarter, and it felt like there were a bunch of high tension moments along the way, and Nebraska didn't win any of those. Like defensively, it did, but you got to win it on both sides. Like you get one of those, you get those two key fourth down stops. You got to go down and do something on offense, and they weren't able to. And maybe that's explainable due to injuries. Maybe it's not, but that's kind of where they're at. I mean, we look at this Iowa game. Uh, it's going to come down to like, kind of like I said, like, does this offense get four big plays or does it get three? And that might be the difference, because
Yeah.
that's just 11 games in. That's kind of where they're at.
It's going to be an interesting week for anyone who's like, I don't care at this point. Understood. Go to bed, enjoy your Sundays. If you are like, what does the week ahead look like? It's going to be condensed. Obviously, Nebraska plays the Black Friday matchup with Iowa, which does make things tougher when you consider that this was a night game. It's a much more condensed schedule, which doesn't make anything easier for anyone. As far as what to expect this week, we'll hear from Matt Rule on Monday and Wednesday. We'll hear from coordinators and players on Tuesday. Have Thursday off before. Well, I'm talking like us. The players typically do a walkthrough and different things on Thanksgiving, I believe. I don't know. Maybe that's different with this staff. I assume so. But anyway, I kind of just, it's going to be a condensed week, so maybe less time to think about things for those of us who are thinking about the potential outcome of Nebraska, Iowa. But like I said, if you're at a place right now where you're like, I just don't want to think about it, totally understood. My only question or my only favor to ask is that you head to counterread.com and bookmark it so that you can join us through hopefully what is not the last week of Nebraska's football season. But also we talk about volleyball, soccer, everything else related to Nebraska athletics. So be sure to head to counterread.com, become a subscriber. You can become a free or a paid subscriber, but you should also like and subscribe like this video, subscribe to this channel. we'll be back with even more this coming week. Brandon, before I let you go, any quick final thoughts?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it was kind of we've seen Nebraska drop games to Wisconsin quite frequently. And this one, like I said, I thought there was a real Nebraska edge, particularly when they went up 14-0. So to not be able to hold on to that, even though it was apparent kind of early on that they'd lost that piece of it, it's a tough one. It's tough. This was their best chance to get that sixth win, and now it's going to take something special against Iowa. So I'll look forward to hearing Rule early in the week and digging into to what exactly it takes for Nebraska to make that happen.
And we will have plenty more to come at Counter Read, both here on YouTube and on our website at counterread.com. Again, subscribe to the newsletter. Brandon, thank you, everyone. Get some sleep. Enjoy your weekends. It's going to be a big week. We'll talk to you later.